My name is Dr. Robert Hawthorne, and I've been an oncologist here in Chicago for over 15 years. I've walked through the cancer ward of Northwestern Memorial Hospital more times than I can count. I've held hands with patients in their final moments. I've delivered news that shattered families, and I've seen miracles that medical textbooks can't explain. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on that October night in 2023. Before I continue, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Stories like this one reach farther than you imagine, and I want to know where hope is traveling tonight. When you work in oncology, you develop what we call clinical intuition. It's not just about reading charts or interpreting scans. It's about sensing when a patient is fighting and when they're ready to let go. After all these years, I thought I could predict how most cases would unfold. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was a Thursday evening around 8 hours when the ambulance brought her in. Rebecca Steinberg, a 42-year-old mother of 2 beautiful children, ages 8 and 12. She had been battling stage 4 pancreatic cancer for 8 months. If you know anything about this disease, you know those words together spell out one of the most aggressive cancers we face in medicine. Her husband, Marcus, never left her side. Not once. I watched him hold her hand like he was physically keeping her soul tethered to this world. Their children would visit after school, doing homework in the corner of the room, their young eyes carrying a weight no child should ever bear. The oldest, Emma, would read to her mother every evening. The youngest, Joshua, would draw pictures and tape them to the wall above her bed. But here's what struck me most about this family. They prayed. Not just casually, not just when things got bad, they prayed constantly. Marcus would whisper prayers over his wife's sleeping form. The children would hold hands and pray before every visit. Even Rebecca, when she had strength, would move her lips in silent conversation with someone beyond that hospital room. As a doctor, I'm trained to focus on facts, statistics, treatment protocols. But watching this family, I couldn't ignore the power of their faith. It filled that room like oxygen. You could feel it the moment you walked in. Yet as a scientist, I kept thinking, faith is beautiful, but cancer doesn't care about prayers. Cancer follows biological rules, cellular patterns, genetic mutations. Cancer kills according to predictable timelines. Or so I believed. Rebecca's condition had been deteriorating rapidly over the past 3 weeks. The tumors had spread to her liver, her lungs, her lymph nodes. The chemotherapy that had given us hope in the beginning had stopped working. Her body had developed resistance, and every new treatment protocol we tried seemed to fail faster than the last. Her weight had dropped to 89 pounds. Her skin had taken on that pale, translucent quality that we medical professionals recognize immediately. The scans from that Tuesday were devastating. I remember staring at the images on my computer screen, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. The tumors had grown by 40% in just 2 weeks. Her liver function was failing. Her breathing was becoming labored. All the medical indicators were pointing in one direction, and that direction wasn't hope. I had seen this progression thousands of times before. The human body has limits, and Rebecca Steinberg was approaching hers rapidly. According to every medical guideline, every statistical model, every piece of training I had received, she had days left. Maybe a week if we were lucky. That's when I realized I needed to have the conversation no doctor ever wants to have. I needed to talk to Marcus about transitioning to comfort care. I needed to help him understand that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is stop fighting and start focusing on peace, on dignity, on saying goodbye. I scheduled the meeting for Friday morning at 10 hours. Marcus would come alone. We both agreed the children didn't need to be there for this discussion. As I prepared my notes, I thought about how to deliver this news gently, compassionately. I've had this conversation more times than I care to count, but it never gets easier. Each time, you're asking a family to let go of hope. You're asking them to accept the unacceptable. But as I was leaving the hospital that Thursday night, something made me stop by Rebecca's room one more time. Call it intuition, call it routine, or maybe call it something else entirely. The hallway was quiet. Most visitors had gone home, and the night shift was just beginning their rounds. Marcus was there, of course, sitting in the chair beside her bed. His hand was wrapped around hers, and his eyes were closed. His lips were moving silently, praying, I assumed. Rebecca was sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady. The monitors showed stable vitals. Nothing alarming, but nothing encouraging either. I stood in the doorway for a moment, not wanting to disturb this intimate scene. That's when I heard Marcus whisper something that stopped me cold. "God, I know you can do the impossible. I've seen you move mountains in other people's lives. Please, please don't take her from us yet. The kids need their mother. I need my wife. But if it's time for her to come home to you, give me the strength to let her go." In that moment, watching this man pour his heart out to God while his wife lay dying, I felt something I rarely experience in my profession: complete humility. Here was a love so deep it was willing to surrender to something greater than itself. Here was faith facing the ultimate test. I quietly walked away, but Marcus's words stayed with me all night. As I drove home through the Chicago streets, I found myself thinking about the thin line between medicine and mystery, between what we can control and what we have to surrender to forces beyond our understanding. Was I witnessing the power of human faith? Or was I about to see God answer a desperate prayer? At that moment, I honestly didn't know. All I knew was that tomorrow's conversation was going to be one of the hardest of my career. Little did I know, by tomorrow night, everything would change. Everything. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, typical Chicago October weather. I got to the hospital early, around 7 hours, wanting to review Rebecca's latest test results before my meeting with Marcus. What I saw in those reports made my heart sink even further. Her white blood cell count had dropped dangerously low overnight. Her kidney function was declining. The protein markers indicating tumor activity had spiked to levels I'd rarely seen in my career. Every single indicator was screaming the same message. We were running out of time faster than I had anticipated. I sat in my office, staring at those numbers, and for a moment I questioned everything. Was I being too clinical? Too focused on statistics? But then my medical training kicked in. The training that had taught me to be honest with families, even when honesty felt like cruelty. At 10 hours sharp, Marcus knocked on my office door. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His usually neat appearance was disheveled. His eyes were red with exhaustion, but there was something else in his expression, a stubborn hope that refused to die. "Dr. Hawthorne," he said as he sat down, "before you say anything, I need you to know something. Last night, after you left Rebecca's room, I had a moment with God. I felt his presence in that room like never before. I know you're a man of science, but I'm a man of faith, and I believe, no, I know, that God isn't finished with my wife's story yet." I took a deep breath. This was always the hardest part of my job, balancing respect for a family's faith with medical reality. "Marcus, I admire your faith more than you know, but I have to share what the latest tests are telling us." I pulled out Rebecca's charts, pointing to the concerning numbers. "Her body is shutting down, Marcus. The cancer has spread too aggressively. Her organs are beginning to fail. According to every medical protocol we have, we're looking at days, not weeks." Marcus listened quietly, his hands folded in his lap. When I finished, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes, but his voice was steady. "Dr. Hawthorne, can I ask you something? Do you believe in God?" The question caught me off guard. In 15 years of practicing medicine, patients and families had asked me many things, but rarely something so direct about my personal beliefs. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Marcus, I've seen things in this hospital that medical textbooks can't explain. I've watched patients recover when everything said they shouldn't. I've also lost patients who should have lived. If there's a God, sometimes I wonder if he's testing us, or if he has plans we simply can't understand." Marcus nodded. "That's honest. That's all I can ask for. But I need you to know that Rebecca and we've been praying for a miracle, not just hoping, believing. And I feel like God is asking us to hold on just a little longer." I felt torn. As a doctor, I had a responsibility to help families make informed decisions based on medical reality. But as a human being, watching this man's unwavering faith, I couldn't bring myself to crush his hope entirely. "Marcus, what if we compromise? We'll continue with comfort care, making sure Rebecca isn't in pain, but we won't pursue any more aggressive treatments. And we'll take this one day at a time." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "One day at a time. That's all any of us really have, isn't it?" After Marcus left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened in that conversation. Here was a man facing the possible loss of his wife, and instead of anger or despair, he had shown me grace and faith that frankly humbled me. I decided to check on Rebecca around 2 hours that afternoon. When I entered her room, I was surprised to find her awake and alert, more alert than she'd been in days. Emma was sitting beside her bed, reading from a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Joshua was coloring quietly in the corner, occasionally showing his mother his artwork. "Dr. Hawthorne," Rebecca said softly, her voice hoarse but clear. "Marcus told me about your conversation this morning." I approached her bed carefully. "Rebecca, how are you feeling right now?" "Tired," she admitted, "but also peaceful." "I want to ask you something, doctor. In all your years treating patients like me, have you ever seen God work in ways that medicine couldn't explain?" Another direct question about faith. I sat down in the chair beside her bed. "Rebecca, I've seen things that challenged everything I thought I knew about medicine. Recoveries that defied logic. Patients who lived far longer than any prognosis suggested they should. Healing that seemed to come from somewhere beyond our treatments." She smiled weakly. "Do you think that was luck? Or do you think that was God?" I found myself really considering her question. "I honestly don't know, Rebecca. But I'm beginning to think that maybe the two aren't mutually exclusive. Maybe sometimes what we call medical miracles are actually glimpses of something greater at work." Emma looked up from her book. "Mommy, are you going to be okay?" Rebecca reached over and touched her daughter's face. "Baby, I'm in God's hands. That's the safest place anyone can be. Tell me in the comments, do you think this was faith or medical science at work? Have you ever witnessed something that challenged what you believed about healing?" That evening, around 9 hours, I made my final rounds. Rebecca's room was quiet. Marcus was there, of course, but the children had gone home with Rebecca's mother. The monitors showed stable but concerning vitals. Rebecca was sleeping, her breathing more labored than it had been that afternoon. I was about to leave when Marcus called out softly, "Dr. Hawthorne, can you stay for just a minute?" I turned back. Marcus was holding his wife's hand, but he was looking directly at me. "Doctor, I need to tell you something. Tonight feels different. I can't explain it. But I feel like we're standing at the edge of something impossible." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I've been married to Rebecca for 18 years. I know her better than I know myself. And right now, even though she looks peaceful, I can feel her slipping away. But I also feel like God is preparing to show us something extraordinary." As if on cue, Rebecca's monitor alarm began to sound. Her heart rate was dropping rapidly. Her blood pressure was falling. I immediately called for the night nurse, and within minutes, we had a full team in the room. "Marcus, you might want to call the children," I said as gently as I could. But Marcus wasn't moving toward the phone. Instead, he knelt beside his wife's bed, placed his hand on her forehead, and began to pray. Not quietly, not privately, out loud, with a voice full of desperate faith. "God, you know the plans you have for Rebecca, for our family. You know the good work you want her to do on this earth. I'm not asking you to change your will, but if it's possible, if this isn't her time, please don't let her go. Please give us more time." The monitors continued their alarming beeps. Rebecca's vital signs were deteriorating rapidly. According to every medical indicator, we were losing her. This was exactly what I had prepared Marcus for in our morning conversation. But as I watched this man pour his heart out to God, as I saw his absolute refusal to let go of hope even in the face of the impossible, something inside me shifted. For the first time in my medical career, I found myself silently hoping that faith might triumph over statistics. The room felt charged with something I couldn't name. Expectation, desperation, love, or maybe all three. And in that moment, as Rebecca's monitors painted the grim picture we all feared, I realized I was about to witness something that would either confirm my medical training or shatter it completely. What happened next would haunt me for the rest of my career. The monitors were screaming now. Rebecca's heart rate had dropped to 32 beats per minute. Her blood pressure was 60/40 and falling fast. Her oxygen saturation was plummeting despite the supplemental oxygen we were pumping into her system. In my 15 years of practice, I had seen this scenario hundreds of times. The body was shutting down, systematically, predictably, following the biological patterns I had memorized in medical school. "Get me an epinephrine drip, stat," I called to Nurse Jennifer Matthews, who had been working the oncology ward for over a decade. Her experienced hands were already moving, anticipating my orders before I spoke them. But even as I fell into the familiar rhythm of emergency medicine, something felt different about this moment. The air in the room seemed heavier, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the medical equipment surrounding us. Marcus never stopped praying. Even as our medical team worked frantically around him, even as Jennifer tried to gently move him out of our way, he stayed right there, one hand on his wife's forehead, his voice growing stronger rather than weaker. "Lord, you parted the Red Sea for Moses," he said, tears streaming down his face. "You raised Lazarus from the dead for Martha and Mary. You gave Rebecca a child when she was 90 years old. Nothing is impossible for you, God, nothing." I caught Jennifer's eye as she hung the epinephrine bag. We had worked together long enough that we could communicate without words. Her slight shake of the head told me what I already knew. The medications weren't having the effect we hoped for. Rebecca's body wasn't responding. At 9:47 that evening, Rebecca's heart rate dropped to 28. Her breathing became irregular, then shallow, then barely perceptible. The pulse oximeter couldn't find a reliable reading. According to every medical protocol I knew, we were watching a 42-year-old mother of two slip away from us. "Marcus," I said as gently as I could, placing my hand on his shoulder, "you might want to call Emma and Joshua, and Rebecca's mother." For the first time since the crisis began, Marcus looked up at me. His face was wet with tears, but his eyes held something I didn't expect. Not resignation, but a fierce determination. "Dr. Hawthorne, with all due respect, I'm not making that call yet. I feel God asking me to keep praying, to keep believing, even when everything looks impossible. I wanted to tell him that medicine doesn't work that way. I wanted to explain that there comes a point where faith has to yield to reality, where hope has to give way to acceptance." But something in his voice stopped me. Something in the atmosphere of that room made me hesitate. At 9:52, Rebecca's heart rate dropped to 25. The monitor showed an almost flat line with irregular, weak beats. Her blood pressure was barely registering. If this had been any other patient, any other family, I would have begun preparing them for the inevitable. Instead, I found myself standing there in the strangest position of my medical career, torn between everything I had learned about the human body and something I couldn't name, couldn't quantify, couldn't measure with any instrument in that. Marcus's prayer changed. Instead of pleading, his voice took on an authority that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "Death, you have no power here," he said, looking directly at his wife. "God has the final say over Rebecca's life. Not cancer, not statistics, not medical charts. Lord, I'm asking you to breathe life back into my wife's body. I'm asking you to show this room, to show Dr. Hawthorne, to show everyone here that you are still in the miracle business." And that's when I heard Jennifer gasp. I looked at the monitor. Rebecca's heart rate had bumped up to 31, then 34. Her blood pressure reading flickered and showed 65/42. "Could be equipment malfunction," I said automatically, falling back on my medical training. "Check the connections." But even as I said it, I could see that Rebecca's chest was rising and falling with more regularity. The color in her face, which had taken on that waxy pallor I knew so well, seemed to be shifting slightly. "Dr. Hawthorne," Jennifer whispered, pointing at the monitor. "Look. Heart rate, 38. Blood pressure, 68/45. Oxygen saturation, 89% and climbing. Now, let me ask you something, and be honest in the comments. When you're watching this, are you thinking this was just a temporary rally that sometimes happens before death? Or are you starting to wonder if something else entirely was happening in that room?" At 9:56, 4 minutes after we thought we were losing her, Rebecca's vital signs had stabilized at levels that, while still concerning, were no longer immediately life-threatening. Her heart rate settled at 42, her blood pressure at 72/40, and her oxygen saturation climbed to 92%. But here's what the monitors couldn't measure: the change in the room itself. The frantic energy that had dominated the space just minutes before had transformed into something else entirely. Not calm, that would be too simple a word. It was more like expectation, like the air itself was holding its breath. Marcus was still praying, but his tone had shifted from desperation to gratitude. Thank you, God. Thank you for hearing us. Thank you for showing us that you're still in control. I stood there, staring at those monitors, trying to process what I had just witnessed. In my medical training, we learn about something called terminal lucidity, moments when dying patients suddenly seem to improve, become alert, have brief conversations with family before passing away. Was that what this was? But Rebecca's improvement wasn't brief or temporary. Her vital signs continued to strengthen. At 10:15, her heart rate was 48. At 10:30, it was 52. Her blood pressure was climbing steadily. Jennifer and I exchanged glances. In all our years working together, we had never seen anything quite like this. Patients don't usually come back from the brink like this, especially not patients with advanced pancreatic cancer whose bodies had been shutting down for weeks. "Doctor," Jennifer said quietly, "should I cancel the—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. Should she cancel the protocols we typically initiate when a patient is actively dying? I looked at Rebecca, then at Marcus, who was now holding his wife's hand with both of his, whispering words of thanksgiving. I looked at the monitors showing vital signs that were still fragile but undeniably stronger than they had been an hour earlier. Let's just monitor her closely tonight," I said finally. Very closely. As I prepared to leave the room around 11 hours, Marcus called out to me one more time. "Dr. Hawthorne, I know what you're thinking. You're wondering if this is just temporary, if she's going to crash again in a few hours. You're trying to figure out if what you just saw can be explained by medicine." He was right. That was exactly what I was thinking. But can I ask you to consider something else? What if what you just witnessed wasn't medical at all? What if you just saw God intervene in ways that your instruments can't measure? I paused in the doorway. "Marcus, even if that's true, her cancer is still there. The tumors haven't disappeared. Her body is still fighting a battle that, medically speaking, it can't win." Marcus smiled for the first time in days. "Doctor Hawthorne, the God I serve doesn't need permission from cancer cells to heal my wife. He spoke this universe into existence. Don't you think he can speak health back into Rebecca's body?" As I walked down that hospital corridor that night, Marcus's words echoed in my mind. I had spent my entire career believing that healing happened through treatments, through medications, through surgical interventions. But what I had just witnessed challenged everything I thought I knew. The question that haunted me as I drove home wasn't whether Rebecca would survive the night. The question was whether I was ready to accept that some things might be beyond the scope of medical science. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see those monitors, Rebecca's vital signs climbing from the brink of death back to something that resembled stability. I kept telling myself there had to be a medical explanation. Maybe the cancer medications had finally kicked in with a delayed response. Maybe her body had found some reserve of strength I hadn't accounted for. But deep down, I knew I was grasping at scientific straws to explain something that felt far beyond the reach of medical textbooks. At 4 hours in the morning, my phone rang. It was Jennifer from the night shift. "Dr. Hawthorne, I'm sorry to wake you, but you need to know what's happening with Rebecca Steinberg." My heart sank. I had been expecting this call. The call telling me that Rebecca had taken a turn for the worse, that the temporary improvement had been just that. Temporary. "How bad is it?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "Doctor, that's just it," Jennifer said, and I could hear something like wonder in her voice. "It's not bad. I don't know how to explain this. Her vitals have been steadily improving all night. Her heart rate is 58, blood pressure is 85/55, and her oxygen saturation has been holding steady at 94%. But that's not the strangest part." I was fully awake now. "What do you mean?" "She woke up around 2 hours. Not confused, not disoriented like patients usually are after what she went through yesterday. She was completely lucid. She asked for water. She talked to Marcus about the children and Dr. Hawthorne. She asked for breakfast. I sat down on the edge of my bed, trying to process what I was hearing. Patients with advanced pancreatic cancer in Rebecca's condition don't wake up asking for breakfast. They don't have sustained improvement in their vital signs. They certainly don't become more alert after episodes like what we witnessed yesterday evening. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told Jennifer. The drive to Northwestern Memorial felt surreal. The Chicago streets were empty except for a few early commuters and delivery trucks. As I navigated through the familiar route, I found myself doing something I hadn't done since I was a child. I was praying. Not formally, not with any particular theology in mind, but just talking to whoever might be listening. If you're really there, I said aloud in my car. If you're really doing something in Rebecca's room, help me understand what I'm supposed to learn from this. When I arrived at the hospital, I went straight to Rebecca's room. What I found there stopped me in my tracks. Rebecca was sitting up in bed, alert, and talking quietly with Marcus. The children were there too. Emma and Joshua had apparently been called in early that morning, but not because their mother was dying. They were there because she was awake and asking for them. "Dr. Hawthorne," Joshua called out when he saw me. "Mommy's awake. She helped me with my math homework." I approached Rebecca's bed cautiously, my medical training warring with what I was seeing with my own eyes. She looked tired, certainly, and still fragile, but there was a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there in weeks. "Good morning, doctor," Rebecca said, her voice stronger than I had heard it in days. "I understand you had quite a night worrying about me." I checked her chart, looked at the monitor readings, examined her pulse and breathing. Everything Jennifer had told me was true. Rebecca's vital signs were not only stable, they were the best they had been since she was admitted. "Rebecca, how are you feeling right now?" I asked. "Different," she said thoughtfully. "I know this sounds strange, but I feel like something changed inside me last night. Not just physically, though, that too. It's like God reached down and touched something in my body that the cancer couldn't reach." Marcus took his wife's hand. "Dr. Hawthorne, I need to show you something." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo he had taken around 3 hours that morning. "Look at her color. Look at her eyes. Compare it to how she looked yesterday." The difference was undeniable. In the photo from that morning, Rebecca's skin had a warmth, a vitality that had been missing for weeks. Her eyes were clear and focused instead of the distant, glazed look I had grown accustomed to seeing. I excused myself and went to review her latest blood work, which had been drawn at 6 hours that morning. What I saw in those results made me sit down hard in the chair at the nurse's station. Her white blood cell count had improved dramatically overnight. Her kidney function markers were better than they had been in a month. The inflammation indicators that had been sky-high were dropping significantly. Most shocking of all, the tumor markers in her blood, the proteins that indicate active cancer growth, had decreased by 40% in less than 12 hours. "Jennifer," I called over to the nurse's station, "did you double-check these lab results?" "I had them run twice, Dr. Hawthorne," she replied. "I couldn't believe them either. But they're accurate." I stared at those numbers, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. In my entire career, I had never witnessed tumor markers drop so dramatically so quickly without aggressive treatment. This wasn't how cancer worked. This wasn't how the human body worked. Let me ask you something, and I really want to hear from you in the comments. When you hear about changes this dramatic happening overnight, what's your first thought? Are you thinking this was just the body's natural healing response finally kicking in? Or are you starting to believe, like Marcus, that something supernatural was happening in room 314? I returned to Rebecca's room with more questions than answers. The whole family was there now. Rebecca's mother, her sister. Even Marcus's parents had driven in from Milwaukee after getting the call that Rebecca was awake and improving. Dr. Hawthorne, Rebecca's mother, Patricia Williamson, approached me. "I know you deal in facts, in science, but I've been praying for my daughter every single day for 8 months. Last night, around 10 hours, I was at home in my living room, and I felt something. Call it a mother's intuition, call it the Holy Spirit, but I just knew that God was working in my daughter's life. I looked around the room at this family, gathered not in grief as I had expected, but in what could only be described as celebration. There was an energy in that space that I had never experienced in all my years practicing medicine. "Rebecca," I said, "I need to be honest with you. What I'm seeing in your blood work, what I'm witnessing in your recovery, it doesn't follow any medical pattern I recognize. Your tumor markers have dropped by 40% overnight. That kind of change typically takes weeks or months with aggressive treatment." Rebecca smiled. "Dr. Hawthorne, do you think God needs to follow medical patterns?" Emma looked up from where she was sitting beside her mother's bed. "Dr. Hawthorne, my Sunday school teacher says that God can do miracles." "Is Mommy having a miracle?" Out of the mouths of babes. This 8-year-old had just asked the question that I, with all my medical training, was afraid to voice. "Emma," I said, kneeling down to her level, "I think your mommy is experiencing something very special, something that reminds us that there are still mysteries in this world that doctors don't have all the answers to." Marcus stood up and walked over to where I was kneeling beside Emma. "Dr. Hawthorne, can I ask you something man to man?" I nodded. "Yesterday morning, when we had our conversation in your office, you were preparing to tell me that my wife was dying. You had charts, statistics, medical evidence, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. But today, less than 24 hours later, those same medical indicators are telling a completely different story. How do you explain that?" I stood up slowly, looking around the room at faces filled with hope, faith, and something that looked a lot like vindication. "Marcus, I can't explain it. Not with anything I learned in medical school. Not with anything I've seen in 15 years of practicing oncology. If I'm being completely honest, what's happening with Rebecca challenges everything I thought I knew about how healing works." Rebecca reached out and took my hand. "Doctor, what if that's exactly the point? What if God is showing you that His ways are higher than medical ways? What if He's inviting you to see healing from a completely different perspective?" As I left the hospital that Saturday morning, Rebecca's words echoed in my mind. For the first time in my career, I was beginning to wonder if the most important healing happening in room 314 wasn't just happening to Rebecca. Maybe it was happening to me too. Over the weekend, I found myself doing something I had never done before in my medical career. I couldn't stop thinking about a patient when I wasn't at the hospital. Rebecca's case had gotten under my skin in a way that challenged not just my medical understanding but my entire worldview. Sunday morning, I was supposed to be enjoying a quiet day off. Instead, I was sitting in my apartment, poring over medical journals, searching for any documented cases of spontaneous improvement in advanced pancreatic cancer. The studies were clear. What was happening with Rebecca simply didn't happen. Pancreatic cancer doesn't reverse course overnight. Tumor markers don't drop 40% without explanation. Patients don't go from death's door to asking for breakfast in the span of 6 hours. Yet I had witnessed all of it. Around 11 hours that Sunday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dr. Hawthorne, Rebecca wanted me to ask you something. She wants to know if you'd like to join us for church service today. She's feeling strong enough to attend, and she says she has something she wants to share with the congregation about what God did in her life this weekend." I stared at that text for a long time. When was the last time I had been inside a church? Medical school? Maybe earlier? But something about Marcus's invitation felt less like a social courtesy and more like, well, like an invitation to witness something significant. I texted back, "What time and where?" Riverside Community Church was a modest building on Chicago's north side, the kind of place where everyone seems to know everyone else. When I walked through those doors at 11:45, I felt completely out of place in my business casual clothes among families dressed in their Sunday best. But then I saw the Steinberg family near the front of the sanctuary, and Rebecca turned to wave at me. The same Rebecca who, just 3 days earlier, I had been preparing her husband to say goodbye to. She looked, I'm struggling for the right medical terminology here. She looked alive. Not just surviving, not just stable, but genuinely, vibrantly alive in a way that seemed to radiate from somewhere inside her. During the service, Pastor Jonathan Reeves asked if anyone had a testimony to share. Rebecca stood up slowly, Marcus supporting her elbow, and walked to the front of the church. "Many of you have been praying for me over the past 8 months, she began, her voice clear and strong. You've prayed when I was too weak to pray for myself. You've believed for healing when the doctors gave us very little hope. She paused and looked directly at me, sitting in the back pew. This weekend, God answered those prayers in a way that defied every medical expectation. My doctor is here with us today, and he can tell you that what happened in my hospital room Friday night cannot be explained by medical science. I felt every eye in that sanctuary turn toward me. My face burned with embarrassment, but Rebecca wasn't finished. Doctor, Robert Hawthorne has been honest with us from the beginning. He told us the truth about my condition, even when that truth was hard to hear. But Friday night, he witnessed something that his medical training couldn't account for. He saw God intervene in ways that hospital monitors couldn't measure. The pastor looked at me encouragingly. Dr. Hawthorne, would you be willing to share what you observed from a medical perspective? I hadn't planned on speaking publicly about Rebecca's case, especially not in a church setting. But something about the genuine curiosity in that pastor's voice, something about the hope in the faces looking back at me, made me stand up. I'm not used to speaking in churches, which got a few understanding chuckles. But I am used to speaking about medical facts. And the medical facts in Rebecca's case are unprecedented in my 15 years of practice. I walked to the front of the church, standing beside Rebecca. Friday evening, this woman's vital signs indicated that she was dying. Her heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing patterns all suggested that her body was shutting down. By every medical protocol I know, I should have been helping her family say goodbye. The sanctuary was completely quiet. But something happened in that hospital room that night. Her vital signs didn't just stabilize, they improved dramatically. Her blood work showed changes that typically take weeks or months to achieve with aggressive treatment. And it all happened in a matter of hours. I paused, looking out at faces that seemed hungry for hope. As a doctor, I'm trained to look for scientific explanations. But I have to be honest with you. I don't have a scientific explanation for what happened to Rebecca. What I witnessed challenged everything I thought I knew about healing, about medicine, about what's possible in the human body. An elderly woman in the front row raised her hand. Doctor, do you think what happened was a miracle? There it was, the question I had been avoiding all weekend. Ma'am, I think what happened was beyond my ability to explain through medicine. Whether you call that a miracle, divine intervention, or something else, I'm honestly not qualified to say. But I can tell you this, it was extraordinary. After the service, I was approached by dozens of church members who wanted to share their own stories of unexplained healing, of prayers answered in impossible ways, of moments when they felt God intervene in their lives in tangible ways. Tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced something in your own life that seemed to defy natural explanation? Something that made you wonder if there was more going on than meets the eye? Rebecca and Marcus invited me to lunch after church, along with their children and extended family. As we sat around a table at a local restaurant, watching Rebecca eat a full meal for the first time in weeks, I found myself asking questions I never thought I'd ask. Marcus, how do you reconcile faith and medical science? How do you believe in divine healing while still trusting doctors and treatments? Marcus cut a piece of his sandwich thoughtfully. Dr. Hawthorne, I don't think they have to be opposed to each other. I believe God can work through medicine, through skilled doctors like you, through treatments, through research and scientific advances. But I also believe he can work beyond medicine when he chooses to. Emma, who had been coloring on her paper placemat, looked up at me. Dr. Hawthorne, do you believe in God now? Children have a way of cutting right to the heart of things, don't they? Emma, I'm still figuring that out, I said honestly. But what happened to your mommy has made me think about things I've never thought about before. Joshua piped up. Maybe God wanted you to see mommy get better so you could help other sick people believe in miracles too. Out of the mouths of babes again. That afternoon, I returned to the hospital to check on Rebecca's progress. Her improvement had continued throughout the weekend. Her energy levels were higher, her appetite was returning, and her overall demeanor was that of someone who was genuinely getting better, not just having a temporary rally. Dr. Hawthorne, she said when I entered her, I have something I need to tell you. This morning, during the church service, I felt God speak to my heart about something. I pulled up a chair beside her bed. I felt like God told me that my healing isn't just about me. It's also about you. He wants to use what happened in this room to open your heart to possibilities you've never considered before. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not medically, but emotionally, spiritually. Rebecca, I have to admit, your case has affected me in ways I didn't expect. I've been a man of science my entire adult life. I've believed that everything can be explained through research, through evidence, through medical understanding. But what I witnessed Friday night scared you? She asked gently. Humbled me, I corrected. It humbled me to realize that maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe there are forces at work in healing that I've never acknowledged or understood. Marcus entered the room carrying coffee for the three of us. Dr. Hawthorne, can I ask you something? If you could know for certain that God was real, that he was actively involved in healing people, how would that change the way you practice medicine? It was a profound question, one that I had never considered before this weekend. I think it would make me more hopeful, I said slowly, more willing to believe that even in the most difficult cases, there might be possibilities I haven't considered. It would make me more humble about the limitations of medical science, while still respecting everything that medicine can accomplish. Rebecca smiled. Dr. Hawthorne, what if I told you that you're already starting to practice medicine that way? As I left the hospital that Sunday evening, I realized that Rebecca was right. Something fundamental had shifted in how I viewed my role as a doctor, how I understood healing, and how I related to the families who trusted me with their most precious loved ones. But the biggest changes were still to come. Monday morning arrived with the kind of anticipation I had never experienced in my medical career. I had scheduled Rebecca for comprehensive imaging, CT scans, PET scans, MRI, to get a complete picture of what was happening inside her body. After everything I had witnessed over the weekend, I needed definitive answers. As I waited for the radiology results, I found myself pacing in my office like an expectant father. Dr. Patricia Foster, our chief of radiology, called me around 2 hours that afternoon. Robert, I need you to come down to imaging immediately. You need to see Rebecca Steinberg's scans. The tone in Patricia's voice was something I had never heard before. A mixture of confusion, amazement, and what sounded like disbelief. When I arrived at the radiology department, Patricia was standing in front of a wall of monitors displaying Rebecca's scans. Beside them were her previous scans from just 1 week earlier. Robert, Patricia said slowly, in 23 years of radiology, I have never seen anything like this. She pointed to the earlier scans. These are from last Monday. You can see the extensive tumor involvement throughout the pancreas, liver, and lymph nodes. The cancer was widespread, aggressive, and growing rapidly. Then she switched to the new scans taken that morning. These are from today. Same patient, same imaging protocols, same machines. I stared at the monitors in complete silence. Where the previous scans had shown extensive tumor involvement, the new images showed dramatically reduced masses. The tumors hadn't just stopped growing, they had shrunk by an estimated 60% in 1 week. Patricia, could there be an error? Equipment malfunction? Wrong patient? She shook her head. I've checked everything 3 times. I even had Dr. Martinez review them independently. These scans are accurate, Robert. Rebecca Steinberg's cancer has experienced a reduction that defies every oncological pattern we know. I felt my legs give out slightly, and I sat down hard in the nearest chair. This is medically impossible. Yet, here it is, Patricia said quietly. Robert, what happened to this patient over the weekend? I looked up at my colleague of 15 years, a woman whose scientific mind I had always respected, and I did something I never thought I would do in a professional setting. Patricia, I think I witnessed a miracle. When I returned to Rebecca's room with the scan results, the entire Steinberg family was there, along with Pastor Reeves from their church. They were holding hands in a circle around Rebecca's bed, praying. Marcus looked up when I entered. Dr. Hawthorne, we were just thanking God for what he's done and asking him to continue his healing work in Rebecca's body. I approached the bed with the scan results in my hands, still trying to process what I was about to tell them. Rebecca, I have your imaging results. The room fell silent. Even though everyone had witnessed Rebecca's dramatic improvement, I could see the fear in their eyes. The fear that this miraculous weekend might have been temporary, that the cancer might still be winning. The scans show that your tumors have shrunk by approximately 60% since last week. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Emma whispered, "Does that mean Mommy's getting better?" I knelt down beside Emma's chair. "Sweetheart, it means that something extraordinary is happening in your mommy's body. Something that medical science can't fully explain." Marcus began to cry. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. "You are so faithful. You are so good." Rebecca reached for my hand. "Dr. Hawthorne, do you believe now?" I looked around that room at faces filled with joy, faith, and vindication. I looked at this woman who, 1 week ago, I had been preparing to die, now sitting up in bed with color in her cheeks and hope in her eyes. "Rebecca, I believe I've witnessed something beyond the scope of medical science. I believe that your healing, whatever we choose to call it, has taught me that there are mysteries in this universe that my training never prepared me for." Pastor Reeves stood up from where he had been sitting. "Dr. Hawthorne, would you be willing to pray with us, to thank God for what He's done in Rebecca's life?" 6 months earlier, that request would have made me uncomfortable. Today, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We joined hands around Rebecca's bed, doctor, patient, family, pastor, and I found myself speaking to God with a sincerity I hadn't felt since childhood. "God, I don't understand how you work, but I've seen your hand in Rebecca's life this week. Thank you for showing me that healing can come from places beyond medicine. Help me to be a better doctor because of what I've learned here." As we finished praying, Rebecca squeezed my hand. "Dr. Hawthorne, I have one more thing to ask of you. Anything. I want you to tell other doctors about what happened here. I want you to share this story with medical professionals who might be treating patients who need hope beyond what statistics can provide." And that's exactly what I did. Over the following months, Rebecca's recovery continued. Her cancer went into complete remission. She returned to her job as an elementary school teacher. She watched Joshua score his first soccer goal and helped Emma with her science fair project. She celebrated her 43rd birthday surrounded by family who had almost lost her. But her healing did more than restore one woman's health. It transformed how I practice medicine. I still rely on medical science, evidence-based treatments, and clinical protocols. But I also make room for mystery, for hope that extends beyond statistics, for healing that might come from sources beyond my understanding. I've shared Rebecca's story at medical conferences, in journal articles, and with colleagues who were struggling with their own impossible cases. Some dismiss it as coincidence, as spontaneous remission that occasionally happens in cancer patients. Others listen with the same wonder I felt that Friday night in room 314. But here's what I know for certain. That weekend changed not just Rebecca's life, but mine as well. It taught me that the most profound healing sometimes happens when we acknowledge the limits of our knowledge and open ourselves to possibilities we never considered. You know what's funny? I still can't tell you definitively whether what happened to Rebecca was divine intervention, the power of faith, an unexplained biological phenomenon, or some combination of all three. What I can tell you is that it expanded my understanding of what healing looks like, what hope feels like, and what it means to witness something truly extraordinary. Rebecca Steinberg taught me that some things belong not only to science, but to life and faith. If this story has touched you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever witnessed something that challenged what you thought was possible? Have you seen healing that went beyond medical explanation? Do you believe that faith and science can work together in ways we don't fully understand? Share this story with someone who might need hope today. Because sometimes, the most important medicine isn't found in a prescription bottle. It's found in the reminder that miracles still happen, even in hospital rooms, even when doctors have run out of options, even when everything looks impossible. You're not alone in needing hope. And you're not alone in believing that there might be more going on in this universe than what we can measure with our instruments. Some things belong not only to science, but to life and faith.